It's a mighty Monday morning, and it's the 17th of November. If you've reached us, you've reached the channel called The Fifth Connection, where we are given to talking you through the storyline. And this morning we are in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse number 15. There was a television series a while back entitled The Beauty of War. Of course, it was a real play on words because it had to do with three sisters, three beauties who, after graduation, go their separate ways and pursue their own lives, and what ensues and happens in each one's life. But as we look at the text that we are busy with, the whole section has to do with an understanding of a side to war that brings victory, a side to war that is beautiful, because the assembly is postured for warfare. Nothing short of it. And if you think that God's calling of you out of darkness into light has to do with you reaching for the deck chair and basking in the sunlight of placidity, then you are highly mistaken. Because he's not called you onto a playground, he's called you onto a battleground. And we're going to see a lot more of that unfold in the biblical text as we pursue the study into chapter 5, all the way into chapter 6. But it starts very early in chapter 5 already. Actually, it starts in chapter 1, verse 1 of Ephesians. Because the writer is talking about the design outcome of the assembly. It is designed in chapter 1, 2, and 3 in a very dynamic way, and it postures for warfare, which is going to come up in 4, 5, and 6. More specifically in chapter 6. The book is about the design outcome for the assembly. It's designed in a way to produce a very specific outcome, a specific way of living, a warfare lifestyle, a warfare kind of way of living. And there's so much right in that image that we can be teasing out of the biblical text. But we're going to start out in verse number 15, because up in chapter 4, verse 1, we are to walk worthy. We are to walk with the highest self-evident values in mind. Walk worthy. Then he moves on to walk in love, then walk in light, then walk in wisdom. And there's a progression through those 4 images. Walk worthy, walk in love, walk in light, walk wisely. They're not 4 different kinds of walks. They are one walk with different focuses to them. We are to walk worthy. Our lives are to be in balance with the highest values that are to be evident in the Christian life. Then we are to walk in love as those who have been afforded high choice. Then we are to walk in light as awakened ones, enlightened ones. In the previous episode, we looked at how that we cannot be sleepwalking in the Christian life. Arise, O sleeper, awake from the dead, and Christ will shine on you, or Christ will give you light. And that's so important to remember, because you need to go through life with an alertness, not only just smelling the roses and going about your routines, but also habituating the disciplines and the rigors of what? Walking with God, walking the way, what it looks like and what it is about. And so starting out in verse 15, you're going to notice the text says, look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise. There's the fourth aspect of walk. Walk worthy, walk in love, walk in light, and now walk wisely. Look carefully then how you walk. Watch how you walk. Watch how you conduct your life. Some versions who talk about walking circumspectly, the way a cat walks on a wall where there is a lot of jagged glass that has been put on the wall, cemented into the top of the wall to prevent vandals and criminals from climbing and scaling these walls. And a cat has the ability to walk on top of that wall. Look carefully then how you walk. Now, this has nothing to do with caution. It has everything to do with discernment. Discernment has to do with knowing how to walk, when you walk, and where you walk. Look carefully then how you conduct your life. Be attentive. As we would say down here in the Cape, wake up. In Afrikaans sê ons wakker slaap, jong, wakker slaap. You need to be awake. You are to walk not as those void of skill, but as skillful livers. Not the organic liver, but the mobile, moving one who is alive. At this point, I want to introduce you to this subject called wisdom. Wisdom is not something you can study from a book and imbibe wisdom. Wisdom is something you reach for. You read for knowledge, you reason for understanding, and you reach for wisdom. I spent quite a bulk of my own time, a couple of years, spending deep time diving into the Old Testament wisdom literature. Because there are 5 books in the Old Testament, Hebrew scriptures, called the wisdom books, or goes under the title of wisdom literature. And here are the 5. Job, the book of Job, selected Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Canticles, or the Song of Solomon. Or sometimes it's called the Song of Songs. 5 blocks of texts in the Old Testament that are given to this pan-international idea of wisdom. Because every ancient culture had wisdom literature, wisdom sayings. And these wisdom sayings, or as we call them, proverbs, rose out of stories. A proverb is a one-liner that rises out of a story that is memorable. And the story is given so often that eventually the proverb becomes the way to remember the story. We have many proverbs and idioms, such as, a stitch in time saves 9. The early bird catches the worm. Cowards die many times before their death. We have tons of proverbs. And proverbs are interesting things because they get you to think. They are what Easterners would call a koan. A koan is something like a proverb. It's something that just tears your brain. Because when you get to a fork in the road, what do? Well, a lot would say, stop. Others would say, take the road that looks safe. I always used to tell my kids because I used to fool around with them, say, what do you do when you get to a fork in the road? And Dad would respond and say, pick it up. Pick it up and put it in your pocket. You may need to eat with it. And the kids would laugh. But Proverbs function like that because they get you to think. And the book of Proverbs, 915 of them, subdivided into 7 collections, believe it or not. 915 verses, 7 collections, 31 chapters, then all brought into 3 divisions of understanding how wisdom works. First 9 chapters has to do with daddy's advice to his naive son. Wisdom for the simple, wisdom for the gullible. Because they are in the early stages of their life. They haven't formed and shaped yet, but they are in process. If you don't guide the process, something else is going to take over and guide that process. Now, it's interesting. We always say, well, don't legislate morality to your kids. I'm going to suggest to you, if you don't do that, someone else will. The world will. How do you imbibe morality as an individual? And how do you communicate and live out that morality so that it becomes attractive? It becomes an attractor in the life of the child. Well, that's a discussion for another day. But the text moves from the first 9 chapters from simple to wise. From chapter 10 to 22, verse 17, you go from simple to wise. And in this section of the book, from 10 to 22, 17, 22, 22, 17, the Proverbs get a little tougher to chew on. Because in chapter 1 to 9, there are 12 poems that the writer is talking, the daddy is talking his child through, making him attentive so that he can become wise. And now the Proverbs get a little tougher. General wisdom that you need from chapter 10, verse 1 to 22, 17. Then 22, verse 18 to chapter 31 and verse number 31. How to become wiser still. So the movement across 915 Proverbs is simple to wise to wiser. And we got our kids to cycle through Proverbs a number of times across their early years under our roof. Because you see, Proverbs, the book of Proverbs addresses almost every single thing that a daddy needs to talk about with his child. Gender issues, sexuality issues, purity issues, bad boys to stay away from, good guys to lock in with, bad girls to stay away from, and good girls to lock in with. Inheritance issues, governance issues, what rulers need to be attentive to when they govern a nation. That's how deep the Proverbs go. They touch every facet of life that you can think of. Money, wealth, health, speech, what you think, right into your imagination. The Proverbs penetrate. And now the text says, walk not as those void of skill. Because that's what wisdom is. Wisdom is about skill. It's about skillful living. It's so hard to give a one-line definition of wisdom because it's such a multifaceted, a multiplex concept. But I guess the best one I've heard thus far, and I'm always working on definitions, polishing them, clarifying them, adding to them. Because it's not just a one size fits all and covers all kind of definition you can come up with. But I think here's a helpful way to look at wisdom. It's one with a rare stability and a rare objectivity. Rare stability in his or her life and a rare objectivity. Oh, we are so subjective and our confirmation bias is so high. We get so ideologically locked into frames of thinking that we can't think out of the box. We can't think outside of the frame. Because the moment you try to teach wisdom, you default to knowledge. Watch how I'm saying that. Wisdom is more caught than taught. And when you try to teach it in a textbook kind of way, it defaults to knowledge. Because you can teach knowledge, you can communicate knowledge, but not wisdom. You can't hotwire wisdom from one person to another. But you will know it when you see it. There is something about somebody who walks with wisdom and talks with wisdom and who conducts their life skillfully in the midst of the storms of life. Now, when it's calm, when the storm bursts, they have a rare stability and a rare objectivity. Along the coast around this country, you have lighthouses. Here in the Cape as well, you have lighthouses. We live in the bay, Gordon's Bay. And when you get into the bay, you can see a little lighthouse from our vantage point in Harbour Island. And then dotted around the coast, you have these huge lighthouses. You go to Komiki, Scarborough, and that area, huge lighthouses that beam across the waters. Now, a lighthouse is a formidable structure because a storm can break out on the coast and smash up against that lighthouse, and that lighthouse will still operate. And the thunder that erupts when you are inside a lighthouse and a storm is breaking is extremely intimidating if you've never been in it before. It's like thunder like you've never heard, and vibrating that is deafening. A wise liver, one who is given to wise living, one is given to wisdom skill, has a rare stability. They can stand strong when the storm breaks. And they can see reality for what it is, even in the midst of the storm, in the eye of the storm. Now, men and women, that takes great skill. And skill doesn't come with gray hair. God imparts skill in the context of reality. That you need to be in touch with the God of heaven, because you reach for wisdom from the platform of love. That's what you see across the book of Colossians. Love becomes the platform from which you reach for wisdom. There's so much to say about this, but the text starts out now on the wisdom walk. Because you have folly's freeway and you have wisdom's walkway. Wisdom's walkway is a pathway, a way of conducting your life in the midst of what is really real. It's being able to move with the flow of reality and yet to be, in a sense, untouched by it. And yet you are in it. But you've got the resolve. You've got enough breaking ability on your brake pads to know when to stop, and enough tiger in your tank to know when to go. Watch how you walk, not as those void of skill, but as skillful. So there's a lot more to say as this text unfolds, but the writer now introduces what wisdom walking looks like. Today, you're going to have an opportunity to exercise skill. Is it going to be wisdom skill that you exercise? Because it's knowing what to do at the appropriate time and the appropriate moment. It's living a life that is apropos to where you are postured. That's what we're going to see in the very next verse. But today, be on the lookout for opportunities where you can take time out to think about, how do I navigate this with skill rather than crashing into the mines and tramping onto the mines in the minefield? Where do I need to walk, and how do I need to walk with skill as I go into this Monday? May God bless you as you walk with Him. Goodbye for now.